a small amount of money, we're not going to make them go through the burdensome kind of hoops that you have to jump through in order to raise under a typical SEC kind of regime. So the goal is to help, for raises. I think it's under $1 million, but I'm not quite. I forget what's under $1 million. Under $1 million, yeah. For raises under $1 million, if you're crowdfunding, that you can do it in a little bit more of a streamlined manner. I think that's kind of the headline: is efficiency. Right.
I just have a quick question about that because I'm not that familiar with it. Is the reason that there isn't the SEC regulation because this kind of money-raising enterprise is not one where these are not really, they're not getting a return, right? If I give $25 to your business, I'm not expecting a return from that, am I?
Well, so some crowdfunding doesn't give you any sort of equity or any sort of rev share, and some does. So it goes either way. Like you'll see a lot of Kickstarter campaigns that are like, hey, if you give us $25, we'll give you a T-shirt, or if you give us $10,000, you get to hang out with me for a day. But that's not a piece of your company. I promise I'm not worth hanging $10,000. You're way overpaying to hang out with me for a day.
They have some other sites. Indiegogo.com allows you to a nonprofit, and listen, you Google it. I'm not telling you to do it, but Indiegogo.com. Right, allows you to put your venture up there, and you have to put a timeline. You want to raise, I don't know, $5,000 in 70, 80 days, and if the money's not raised by 70 or 80 days, everybody that gave to that particular venture just gets their money back. If the money is raised by 70 or 80 days, you get the $5,000 or $10,000, and there's no repayment back. So it's a global community of individuals and high-net organizations and individuals that just want to support your venture because they like what you're doing. And it's an opportunity to create greater access and also to free yourself up from government funding, at least a little bit. This is the discretionary funding that you're looking for right here because there's no ties to this. It's just the global community saying, I like Kyle Westaway's idea of having beach volleyball for poor kids on Sunday.
They need their beach volleyball too.
Yeah. And I need to raise $5,000, and then Indiegogo just puts that up on their website. And then as an individual, I'll go onto the website and say, okay, let me see what's under sports. And then all these things come up, and then it's, beach volleyball. I like beach volleyball. And they want to raise $5,000, I'll send them $50. And if they don't raise $5,000 in 80 days, I get my $50 back. So that's just one opportunity. So that's what crowdfunding is. It's a crowd of people. Honestly, think about it, right? It's a crowd of people, but it's a global crowd now. It's a global crowd. Just supporting your particular venture. And you don't need to have a mission, or you just have to have a basic explanation of what it is that you do, and then it'll get supported. The other one, the other idea that I want to talk about is program-related investments that we were briefly talking about.
Okay, cool. So program-related investments are they are funding from a foundation. It's an exemption to an exception of the rule in 1969 Tax Act, whereby foundations are able to give money that they may see a return on, either in a debt structure, so as a loan, or in an equity structure, taking ownership of a for-profit company. The problem with, so these have been around since 1969. It's not a new thing at all, but there has been difficulty in making a lot of these flow very well. And the difficulty has been this: the transaction costs, generally speaking, are fairly high. So in order for a foundation to do this and do this properly, well, I should say if they do it improperly, they get a pretty big slap on the wrist by the IRS. And so every foundation, generally speaking, is pretty risk averse and doesn't want to kind of be pushing the boundaries if they don't have to. So if they want to make a PRI, it has to be to a company that has primarily a charitable purpose that's in line with theirs. So the ways that they determine that is they do one of two things, typically, is they ask the IRS for a private letter ruling around, does this business work as a PRI for us? The IRS takes their time, they think about it for a while, they look at it, and then maybe whatever 8 months or a year later they get a letter back that says yes or no. And or they work with an outside counsel, they hire a law firm to give them an opinion letter saying, yes, this would, in our opinion, this would be eligible for a PRI, and this wouldn't be. The problem with that is it's costly and it takes a while typically. So the transaction costs can be anywhere between $15,000 to $60,000 to get one PRI done. Now, that being said, unless you're making a really big amount, unless you're making a really big PRI, that doesn't really make sense. If you're spending $60,000 to give someone $100,000, that's a really inefficient way to give somebody $100,000, right? So there's been a lot of hurdles to this. One of the reasons why the L3C came into being was that there was a hope that if we could create this structure that clearly says that we are, pursuing charitable purposes, that the IRS would bless that structure, and they would be totally PRI eligible, and so all these L3Cs would just be getting floods of money from these foundations. The problem is that hasn't happened. The IRS didn't give the blessing to the L3C structure. They weren't willing to say, carte blanche, that all L3Cs are indeed PRI eligible. So that leads us to kind of a question of, like, is there any way to help PRIs flow more? And in fact, there are some interesting issues on the horizon that may help us with that.
Thanks a lot. So now the other opportunity is from the private sector, and it's called impact investment. Impact investment opportunities. And, in 2010, JP Morgan Chase put out a study that said, impact investment is now a viable asset investment class across all investment classes, right, in 2010. They said, this is what it is, it's trillions, I'll say that again, trillions of dollars that may be available. And then in 2011, they came out with another study that said, okay, we told you that impact investment is a viable investment asset class, right? And now in 2011, we're telling you that this is the makeup of the impact investor. This is what they're looking for to invest in organizations. And these are the challenges or questions that need to be answered. And so, in the study, they said a couple of things. And I had reached out to a colleague of mine who funds or invests in social entrepreneurs and social entrepreneur ventures. And I said, well, if you're dealing with the impact investment market, can you be a nonprofit? And he said, primarily no, because the nonprofit needs to be able to repay this investment at some point. And so the idea then here is that the impact investment market is looking for a number of things. One, they're looking to invest in socially driven ventures that gives them a rate of return of about 8 to 9 to 10%. They're just not giving you money away. They want a return for this money, right? The problem is that there isn't enough of an investment opportunities for them to begin to invest in. There aren't enough ventures that are grouped under, services to at-risk youth, so that they can compare and make an investment decision on which particular youth program will give me the best return on my money. So there's a limited number of investment opportunities. The other one is that that there is no track record in the sector that allows them to look at this as a viable investment opportunity. And the third one, and the most important one, is that there isn't a set measurable system in place that allows them to see how their money is being monetized socially, and what is the impact of that money that they're investing, and how can they be sure that they're going to get the maximum rate of return within 6 to 8 to 9% of their money. So those three areas are lacking, but it's those answers are beginning to be, those questions are beginning to be had in ventures and in conferences much like this. The Global Impact Investment Network is creating the IRIS program, has created the IRIS program, which allows impact investors to look at, like enterprises, using a universal matrix of measuring systems that says all these youth programs, these are all the youth programs, and now I can, as a high net worth individual go into the IRIS program, and I can now say, okay, I want to support the Kyle Westaway or the Nancy Eberhardt